2 demands, same teacher, same course, same year. Set several of his self-initiative lines beside the theft command, and the first comes to this: depend on no one, cringe before no man, and let nobody but God alter your will. Another goes further than honesty. Prefer death, he tells them, to stealing from the organization. Not merely be careful with the money. Die before you take from the cause. Hold those two side by side for a second. One builds a self that refuses all human mastery. The next hands that same self over whole. This is the 3rd episode in our walk through Marcus Garvey's Message to the People, the book that collects a course he taught in his last years in 1937, 3 years before his death, to 11 students at his School of African Philosophy in Toronto. It's the part of the course, as I read it, that turns from how to think and what to believe to who to become. Garvey says, quote, "Every man is his own responsibility in life," end quote, and he means it all the way down. On the generous reading, he isn't asking for mere obedience. He is asking you to become ungovernable, and then to give the ungovernable thing away. So which is it? When you build a self strong enough to need no one, and then spend that self completely on a cause, did you just become free, or did you just find a better owner? Start with character, because that's where the comfortable reading lives. At first, Garvey can sound, to modern ears, like plain self-help, the kind sold in airport bookstores and morning routines. Be honest, pay your debts, keep your name clean. But listen to why, because the why is where it gets strange. Honesty is the best policy is a phrase you've heard 1,000 times. Watch what he does with it. His line is, quote, "The greatest prop to character is honesty. Honesty is the best policy," end quote. A policy. Here he frames honesty less as inner purity than as policy. It pays, he says, the way a clean credit record pays. Your good name, he tells them, is good credit, and people will trust you on it like money in the hand. So character here isn't who you are when nobody's watching. It's the thing the community can bank on. And if you think I'm pushing that too hard, look at one place where the language goes absolute, and it is a strange place. Not God, not family. Theft from the organization. Garvey was teaching this in Toronto after a 1923 mail fraud conviction and a 1927 deportation from the United States, where the U.N.I.A. he founded had grown into one of the largest black mass movements in the country's history. A man does not demand that kind of loyalty to a thing that cost him nothing. He told the class, quote, "In working for the U.N.I.A., prefer death to stealing from the U.N.I.A., end quote. Die first. The man who robs the movement doesn't get reformed, he gets removed." The lesson says, quote, "Get him out of the way and march along," end quote. The clean self, the honest self, the self with the good name, is being built so it can be trusted with the destiny of a whole race. That's the first clue, and it's pointing outward. Now the course turns harder. In the lesson on self-initiative, Garvey builds an unusually severe model of self-command. Fall back on yourself first for what you want. Ask for help only once you have proven you cannot do the thing alone. And he treats dependence itself as a dangerous kind of capture. Garvey says, quote, "A person who has to depend on others is not himself or herself, but the subject of others," end quote. A subject. Lean on someone, and you don't become connected, you become owned. And then he reaches for the picture that tells you what kind of world he thinks you're in. Quote, "Meet the stare of man with your stare. Never cringe before the stare of man, otherwise he masters you," End quote. He compares it in plain words to how a man stares down a lion or a wild beast. Drop your eyes first, he says, and the other man has you. So don't be the one who looks away. Garvey wrote, quote, "Never be a worm," end quote. Now, the strongest defense of this is obvious, and it deserves its full weight. Tell a people who have been required to lower their eyes that they may hold a stare, and you have handed them something close to dignity itself. That is real. But notice the crack already opening. Taken to its severest edge, this language makes depending on anyone, even inside a movement, hard to explain. The man who built one of the largest black mass movements in U.S. history is teaching you to become the kind of person who, taken at his severest, would have struggled to build what he built. And I have a hard time seeing how a mass organization works at all without mutual reliance, which strains his language of dependence to the breaking point. A self that treats dependence as the edge of mastery and every face as a staring contest buys its freedom by paying in solitude. It can't be captured, true, but it also can't be held. And here is the deepest version of that defense, put in his own logic. A movement of dependence is a movement of subjects, easily bought and easily broken. Only people who need no one can choose to serve and mean it. A gift is only a gift if the giver could have kept it. That is the best case for the whole hard program, and I can't wave it away. If self-initiative is the inside, the next lesson is the outside. And here, Garvey just says it. Personality to him isn't who you are, it's gear. His words, quote, "A thing to impress the world with is your own personality," end quote. A thing to impress with. He tells his students the world is always hunting first for your defects, judging you from your shoes to your dollar, and that a perfect personality is, in the exact word he reaches for, a passport. He tells a little story about two beggars. One was filthy, so he gave him a penny. The other was poor but clean, so he gave him a gold sovereign. Because, in his own words, he thought that one could appreciate the use of it. Same need, different surface. The surface decided the gift. And then the line that should stop you flat. Quote, "Keep smiling. Keep being pleasant all the time, even if you are dying." End quote. Better a pleasant corpse, he says, than a hideous one. The lesson lives in a world of poverty and public judgment, and ours runs on different machinery, but the instruction underneath survives the move. Make yourself into something that impresses and passes inspection. Put his two beggars on a phone screen. The dirty one, the messy profile, you scroll right past. The clean one, the polished profile, gets the follow, gets the benefit of the doubt, gets the sovereign. Same appeal, different surface, and the surface still decides. Decades later, Goldman Sachs described a creator economy already worth roughly $250 billion in 2023, and forecast it could approach $500 billion by 2027, an economy where the self is the product and the surface is the pitch. This is an echo, not an inheritance. He did not predict the influencer, but the self as a surface built to be trusted at a glance is one instinct that economy rewards. He gave you the word himself. Your personality is a passport, and your job is to keep it stamped. So now we've got the parts. A self that is honest in language that sounds strikingly instrumental, sovereign because need is capture, polished because the world inspects the surface. The last of these 4 lessons takes those parts, bolts them together, and points them somewhere. Garvey tells his students a life needs a program. A chart to steer the days by. Rise at a set hour. Work and rest by method. And purpose, for him, is not a nice to have. He even reaches for a verse to carry the point. From the poet Ella Wheeler Wilcox, quote, "Have a purpose, and that purpose keep in view," end quote. Then Garvey pushes the lesson into a harsher command. Garvey wrote, quote, "It is better that you be dead than having no purpose in life," end quote. Sounds like a man overstating his case. And then you run into a modern echo of it in a medical journal. A 2019 study in JAMA Network Open tracked nearly 7,000 U.S. adults aged 50 and older, and the ones lowest in sense of purpose carried more than twice the mortality risk of the ones highest in it across the next 4 years. Hold the gap in view, though. Garvey is making a moral command, not reporting a study. The JAMA paper is a 4-year observational association in older U.S. adults. It does not prove him right. It just rhymes. And the rhyme is enough to make you stop. He took something real about purpose and pushed it into a slogan. And the real thing was sitting there under the slogan. But watch where his purpose is allowed to point. He told them, quote, "To live for something doesn't only mean something for yourself, but something for your kith and kin, and something for your race," end quote. And here, finally, the easy reading breaks. If I read him only as an early prophet of pull yourself up individualism, I have it exactly backwards. The sovereign self, the one that needs no one and outstares any man, was never built to belong to the person who owns it. It was engineered across these 4 lessons to be spent. I can make the sunny reading work, but only if I keep ignoring how often the collective, first the organization, then kin and race, walks into the frame. So take his own best defense, the one we held on to. Only a free person can truly give. Fine, but Garvey does not leave the giving optional. He makes refusing it feel like a betrayal, puts death on the far side of purposelessness, and points purpose beyond the self, at kin and race. The discipline that was supposed to make the gift possible is the same discipline that can make refusing it feel like a betrayal. Go back to the contradiction we opened on. You can make those 2 instructions look like one teaching, but only at a cost. You have to stop asking who the self was finally for. So here's the reading I'll defend, said plainly enough that you can argue with it. The self Garvey builds is free in its discipline and owned in its purpose. And the course does not present those as opposed. The freedom is the training, and the training is for service. And he believes, down to the floor, that a self spent on your own people is the highest use a self can have. Given the racial and political stakes his course names, it is hard to stand here and call him wrong. And his best case still stands in the room. Maybe a self is only fully itself when it is given away. And the modern itch to keep the self for yourself is the smaller, lonelier idea. He might be right about that. But here is where I still land. A freedom you are not allowed to refuse is a strange kind of freedom. And that, in the end, is what he hands them. Live for your race or be worse than dead. Garvey's course invites the conclusion that spending yourself on a just cause is the most freedom a person can reach. But if the cause fails, or sours, or turns on you, you have already signed away the one patch of ground you would have needed to stand on and say no. So before you decide Garvey was building free men, turn it on yourself, because you may recognize pieces of his program right now. Building the brand, watching your own back, living for something. If a self is only free when it can still refuse its own cause, then the leash was there from the character lesson onward. And I think it was. I think a self you are not allowed to keep was never fully yours to give. But I notice how much I want him to be wrong, and I am not certain he is.